Today I wanted to do a garden tour here in the middle of summer in Phoenix. It is the third week of July, and we have had probably 110 to 115 degree days for the last 2 weeks straight. So this is probably about the hottest we're going to get all year, and this is probably going to be the most stressful time for roses. If you're from like the Midwest or the East Coast, you may think, oh, it's summer, roses should be doing fantastic, but it's kind of reversed here. In fact, roses do much better here in the winter. Really, fall and spring is the best time for roses here, but I mean, 115 degrees is very hot. So this is kind of their winter, so to speak, for other parts of the country. So I do want to show you how they've been doing. Really, they look pretty good in the 100-degree temperatures. It's really not until you start to get into the 110s, 115s consistently that you are going to start to see a bit of stress on the rose, even if you're watering, just because it is very hot, and that is normal. So basically what typically ends up happening with roses in the heat is the flowers get a lot smaller, and then the foliage gets a lot smaller. That'll happen when temperatures get to be around 100 degrees or so. You'll notice that the foliage gets smaller, the flowers are, again, they get smaller, and then sometimes with the multicolored flowers, mine will start to change color because it gets a lot hotter. So that's typically what happens, but then when you get in the 110s, you really do notice some stress on the rose, and that's okay. That doesn't mean they're going to die or anything. It just means that it's very hot out. And really, when it gets to be 110, they tend to not want to bloom. And if you think about it, blooming, flowering is a form of reproduction. And if you're outside in 115-degree weather, you probably don't want to reproduce either. So it makes sense. But I will show you, I will take you around, and I'll show you, in this video I think I'm just going to show you all my like traditional roses, which would be my teas, floribundas, grandifloras, and I'll just let you know how each one's doing. There are some varieties of roses that do better in the heat. It's not to say I would purchase this rose or not purchase it because it does better in the heat. It's just to say they do a little better in the heat. Most roses that you can buy here that say, you know, that are rated for zone 9, which we live in, they'll live and thrive and they'll look good most of the year, but some do a little better in the heat. And I'll show you that, and I'll just show you how they look in extreme temperatures and kind of what to expect with your roses as well. So as long as you water, and I did do an irrigation video on how to do summer watering, and if you're doing, as long as you're getting the necessary water on the rose, they should make it through the summer. So I'm going to take you, and we're going to look through my roses, and we're going to see what's typical of summer weather on the rose. So here's a look at my rose garden here on the side yard. You can see everything looks pretty green, pretty nice. So overall, even though it's very hot and the roses do get a bit stressed out when it's 110, 115, you can see they're still green, and they're still, even some are still blooming, so you will get some color still from them. And overall, they should look good as long as you're watering. So this guy right here is my Ketchup and Mustard. You can see it is blooming right now, and the Ketchup and Mustard has the red and the yellow, which the yellow is probably more faded to cream just with the high temperatures. And you can see with my fingers to scale, this rose is very small, and that's what happens. As the temperatures get hotter, the blooms do tend to get smaller. And you can see here the foliage is quite small as compared with the growth that came with the winter springtime. So That is very typical, very common for roses, but overall it's looking good. I would say this guy's pretty heat tolerant, although he does get some afternoon shade, so that may be helping him a little bit. Okay, so this guy right here, this is called, is it Blue Lady, Blue Girl, something like this. When it blooms, it's a very large purple lavender rose, and it has very good fragrance, very good smell, but you can see right now it's not blooming. And you know, I don't expect it to. And this one, I think, as far as like heat sensitivity goes, the flowers on this do tend to get smaller faster than my other roses. You can see here it does have some new growth on it, and you can see that the 110-degree weather did kind of take a toll on some of this new foliage, but you know, that's okay. Overall, I think the bush is doing well, and that's just what happens when it's 110 degrees out. But I don't expect this guy to bloom again until it gets a bit cooler. Okay, so this is Grande Dame. It is usually a really big pink flower, but you can see it's so tiny. It's still really cute, and it's still, you can see it was still putting on some blooms. Oh look, there's a dead bee. Look. It was so hot the bee died. How sad. Okay, so you can see it was still trying to bloom, and it was blooming really up until it got very hot. And then once it got very hot, you can see the blooms decided that they did not want to continue their life cycle, and they kind of shriveled up and died, along with this bee here. But that's okay. Overall, the plant, I think, looks good. Still has new growth on it, and once we get out of the 110s, it should, I expect this guy to put on a lot of blooms. I do expect this guy to put on quite a bit of new blooms, even in warmer temperatures, even in the hundreds. It's just really hot right now. You can see here, this has like a brand new little shoot coming off, so this is actually doing pretty well. You can see back there's a new shoot, so it's still doing pretty good, especially for the temperature. You can see another new shoot there. So I would say overall this is pretty good for the heat. But yeah, like even if it does well in the heat, it'll still have its moments. So this little guy is brand new. I believe it is called Easy Spirit, and it is doing quite well. You can see the blooms are still quite large. They still have quite a few rows to the petals. The petals are still forming kind of their full double shape. Some are not. Let's find it. You can see this guy, he was affected by the heat, and that's typical. They'll a lot of times they won't put on as many doubly bloomed petals, if that makes sense. They'll just have like a single or not as full look to them. Although like this guy still has a nice shape. You can see here though, he put on, this is like a nice new shoot that was growing on it, and then it got to be 110 degrees, and you can see it started to get a bit crispy, and you know, that's okay. It's 110 degrees out. But I would say overall this guy is doing really good for heat. So let's Good. So this one is my Oklahoma. He's not really blooming right now. He was blooming. I just deadheaded him, but he was doing very well in blooming just a couple of weeks ago, and now that we've hit that magic 110 number, I'm not seeing too much new growth on it, which is fine. You can see right here some of the new growth. Some of the new growth. The foliage is very small. The leaves do tend to get more yellow, and that is, I need to fertilize more. When it starts to get hot and they get a little heat stress, the leaves will tend to yellow more than they would in the winter time. You can see here kind of yellower leaves on the bush. This guy is a bloom. It's not bad. The foliage is getting a little toasty. Smaller leaves. The bloom's not terrible, but there's not terribly much new growth on this right now. You can see there are new blooms or new shoots. There are some small new shoots. I don't expect them to get too big. I expect them to be about like that. See how that new shoot was very short, and then the rose is not as big as it would be typically. But like I said, a couple of weeks ago, this was putting on beautiful large blooms, so I do think it is doing very well in the heat. It's just that time of year. So this is Doris Day. This is one of my Floribundas, and I think she went in this winter, so I planted him bare root over the winter, and I think that this is probably doing the best out of all of my roses with the heat. You can see there's quite a few blooms on. They're still a good size, even though they're not as big and fully double as they would be. This is a new one. Still, it's smaller than it usually would be, but still good. Still has the yellow color to it. It still has this cluster of blooms on it. And overall, I would say this is probably the best one in my yard as far as my traditional roses go. And you can see it's got some new shoots down there. And again, the leaves are smaller than they're going to be in the winter, and that's just how it goes. You can see this guy, he's not got very many. This is kind of a really small, cute little bloom there, but here's a new bud that is about to open. Plenty of new growth, and this gets a lot of sun. A lot. This probably gets the most sun. This spot in my yard probably gets the most sun. So this is a really good one if you need a sun hardy rose. Okay, so a lot of the blooms on this guy are spent, so that's why they look a little crispier. I just didn't deadhead it yet, but you can see it was blooming, and it has a nice color, and you can see it's got some new growth, new buds. This is, it's not Twilight Zone. I'll have to put the name down below. You can see it still has some new growth on it. I would say overall it's doing pretty well. Like all my other roses, again, very small. And this is a lot lighter than, this color of this is usually a lot darker, more like a burgundy, especially when it's cooler out. This is lightened up quite a bit. The flowers are very small, but you can see it's still producing clusters of flowers. It still looks pretty nice. Again, small flower, very cute though. And another thing that happens in high temperatures here in the desert is the roses will tend to lose their fragrance. They won't be as fragrant, especially into the afternoon. So so that is something. So he's doing pretty good. Okay, so this is Easy Does It. This one I planted this winter as a bare root rose, and I would say this guy, he still overall looks good, but I think he's a little more sensitive to the heat than some of the other roses I have. You can see it put on this really nice new growth. It's like a really nice thick shoot, and then it got really hot and you can see it's just kind of burnt up, and you can see a lot of the new would-be new buds, new stems, they kind of just burnt up. You know, I've had roses for a while, and I used to only water my roses like twice a week in the summer, and most of my roses made it. Although I have killed a couple of roses, so I do know what they look like before they die, and they actually don't look. When mine died, they didn't look like brown. They didn't really brown up like that. They weren't. What they were doing is they weren't putting any new growth on at all, and they still looked green and remained green. And then by the time it started to get cooler, and they should have been growing and looking really nice, then that is when they just shriveled up, turned brown, and completely died. So the fact that we still have new growth coming out, even though it's really small, this is tiny little foliage, that's a good sign that the rose is doing well. It's very hot and it's a little stressed, and you know, sometimes some of the new growth will kind of burn off and die, and it should be fine. The rose should be fine. You know, it's just a little hot out. But we should get some monsoon rain here, and it should cool off, and these guys should be happy again soon. So overall, I mean, this rose is still doing well, but I do think this one's a little bit more heat sensitive than some of my other roses are. This one is called Falling in Love. He's been doing okay. I would say okay this summer. You can see here this bud got a little hot. You can really tell. Some of the new foliage not looking too good, but I do have some blooms that are, this one's a little spent, but this one looks pretty good. It's again very small, smaller than normal. These ones still have, so this one you can't really see the pink in it, but these ones over here, they have the characteristic pink center. It looks, and kind of the double bloom. It's just very small, very cute though. So overall, it's doing okay this summer. Let's see the other side. You can see here, this is new growth. The new growth did look pretty good, but the foliage on it's pretty small, and then again it got very crispy, and the bud just didn't enjoy the weather. This same over here, this bloom is spent, but the foliage is very small, getting a little crispy. But you know, still trying to bloom, still looks good. Okay, so this guy is my distant drums. This guy gets a lot of sun, and he gets especially a lot of afternoon sun. This wall right here that it's sitting next to is a western facing wall, and that wall is like a heat box. So this guy gets quite a bit of heat, and I think for as much heat as it's getting, it is doing really well. So I do suggest this rose for the desert. These are kind of spent blooms, so that's why they're drying up, but you can see the flowers have gotten very small with the 110. Very small and tiny. Look how cute that is. It's so cute. The foliage is tiny. This little bud is tiny. It's just very hot, but it's a good sign that it's still trying to grow. And even here you can see some of this new growth is just kind of had it and burnt up. That's okay. Overall, the plant looks good, and once it starts to cool down again, see, it's got new growth here, new growth over here. So once it starts to cool down again, these blooms will get a bit bigger, normal looking again, and it'll look good. But yeah, like I said, this gets full afternoon sun, and he does very well. This is my other distant drums rose bush. If you saw my playing the native flute with my roses, this was the rose bush that I was in front of, and that was just a couple week or two ago that I did that video, and it looked really good. So again, I think distant drums does very well here in the heat. This guy, however, does get some afternoon shade, so you can see he is a bit bigger than the other one, but you can still see that even though it's getting the afternoon shade, it's still getting these tiny little flowers, tiny little foliage. It's just no amount of shade is going to stop it from being 110 degrees out. I also haven't deadheaded it, so don't mind that, but these new leaves right here are good, look good. So like I said, overall, distance drums I think does very well here in the heat. So this guy, I think I forgot to fertilize him because he has some of his foliage is a lot lighter, and you can really tell. So I do need to give him some more food to kind of remedy some of those lighter leaves. But this is my oldest rose bush that I've had. I actually got him from the Home Depot, still alive, has made it through several summers, and does pretty good. This is, even though it was from the Home Depot, when it blooms, this has some of the prettiest blooms, I think. I didn't deadhead it, so ignore the dry, crispy leaves. That's just normal deadheading. And then you can see here, this one got pollinated. So I did a video on what happens if I don't deadhead. And I said most of mine are not pollinated and they fall off. But this guy, it looks like he got some, I believe these guys should turn into hips. And I'm not going to deadhead it because I've never had a hip on a rose and I want to see what it looks like. So I'm going to leave them here and just leave this rose bush as is. Overall, I'm not seeing too much new growth on it. Let's see if I can. So down here, it looks like I see this guy looks like some new. This guy looks new, and then you can see here how sad it got too hot and it burnt up the new foliage. But like I said, that's okay, and this guy should be good. This one is called Tahitian Sunset. And then this guy next to it, again, I didn't deadhead it, so ignore the crispy blooms. That has like no bearing on how well the rose is doing. So see here, I didn't deadhead it, so it had a flower and then it dried up, crisped up, and that's fine. It doesn't mean that the flower is good. Because the flower is spent, it doesn't mean that the rose is going to die. It's perfectly fine. But this is a really pretty bush. It's a coral bush. It is called Lasting Peace, and it's looking pretty good. It doesn't have any new blooms or It doesn't have very many new blooms on it because you can see it just had its cycle, which is why I have a bunch of dead ones that need to be deadheaded. You know, it just bloomed, so the cycle is that, you know, they'll bloom and then the blooms are spent and then they'll look like this, and then it'll grow new growth. So it doesn't have a ton of new growth on it right now just because of the cycle that it's in, although this down here does look like new growth. And yep, it probably grew recently because again you can see this little crispy piece. Ooh, yep, it's just too hot right now. And this guy actually does get afternoon shade, and again 110 is 110, but still looking good. All right, so there you have it. Now that I have walked around my yard and gotten a little hot and sweaty, those were all of my traditional roses. I hope that really helped. I will do a video about some of my miniature and ground covers, and then I'm probably also going to do a video on the David Austin climbers that I just put in this year. That way you can see how well those bushes are taking the heat. And I just put in this wisteria vine next to me, and to my surprise it is blooming right now. So I will leave you with a shot of the blooms on this wisteria vine. They actually are very fragrant. And I didn't know that they would bloom in the summer, so that was a surprise. So I'll leave you with that. Bye. If you have any questions or comments, please ask the question in the comments below. And if this was helpful, please do subscribe.